Welcome to the Rimworld mod rundown. We'll be taking a quick look at what you can expect to see from Altered Carbon 2 ReSleeved. For starters, you'll need to own the Biotech DLC, as well as the additional workshop content, vanilla expanded framework and harmony. Whilst not required, this mod does have interactions with ideology and royalty. Today we've got a mod that leans more on the side of being mechanics and concepts heavy, without throwing an excessive amount of structures your way to overcomplicate things in terms of a production line. So whilst this might come across a tad more involved than most, you aren't going to be bogged down with learning 100 different interactions to get things up and running. What does Altered Carbon include then? You've got 11 new research projects, some of which are going to be locked behind the study of a new item, similar to how a Mechanator works, with this new item only available from a new associated quest. As of this version anyway, it seems more interactions are planned in the future. From these research projects, you'll be unlocking structures, items and processes to create and control your own stacks and sleeves, granting colonists a form of near immortality, as well as getting your hands on some new implants, a weapon, a meme and the presets to go with it, as well as a few small mechanical tweaks to allow you to attempt to remove biocoding, persona bonds, or even create skill trainers, and finally a selection of punk inspired haircuts to match your new cyber aesthetic. If you're watching this and you raised an eyebrow at the words stack and sleeves, some of this mod is going to be understandably lost on you, as it's based heavily around the world of Richard Morgan's Altered Carbon, which later saw both a Netflix adaptation and a graphic novel. It also includes a few parts that will feel familiar to you if you've played, read or watched anything set in the Cyberpunk 2077 universe, although if you're coming to this hoping for genital sliders, you're still going to need to install the forbidden mod, I'm afraid. Fortunately, this mod does come with significantly less bugs than the launch of 2077 did.
Wake the fuck up, samurai. We have a city to burn.
Let's start with the quest then, as this is what's going to be kicking off the majority of your interactions with the new systems included in ReSleeved, acting as an introduction to the core concepts around it. This is currently set to occur automatically when you reach around 75 days of in-game time, which means, provided you're not doing anything other than a tribal start, you should be at a place where you can start to make use of the rewards from accepting this. The quest will spit an absolutely ruined colonist on the border of your map, plastered with wounds and infections. They're normally too far gone to save, but it isn't impossible with some setups. Not to worry though, as you're going to find that person you've accepted comes with some new technology installed in their body, and a means of making sure that even if their meat puppet perishes, it isn't going to be the end of the world for them. Of course, not everything is quite as simple as getting a colonist with some fancy new tech and research objects for free, so soon you're going to find out the reason that they were fleeing when a hostile force turns up on your doorstep intent on killing them. Given the stage of the game that this quest is normally going to appear, the threat itself shouldn't be anything too crazy, just make sure that it hasn't landed around the same time that you've harvested an entire field of Devilstrand or just finished digging out a mountain's worth of steel. By using the timings that my runs usually follow, this quest normally appears around when I was starting to move away from establishing the core of my base and into higher quality armour or weapon production, so I did need to be a little bit careful about moderating my stockpiles. Once this threat has been dealt with, you will have a little bit more time to look at what this fleeing colonist came in with, as well as trying to address their injuries, if you're in the habit of wasting meds on lost causes. And whilst it isn't always the case that they come in with life-threatening problems or fail to recover, if they somehow don't have any immediate dangers left, I often found that they had other long-term issues, like cataracts, a bad back, or maybe neurological problems.
He says he's not dead.
Yes, he is.
I'm not. He isn't?
Well, he will be soon. He's very ill.
I'm getting better. No, you're not. You'll be stone dead in a moment.
They'll have arrived carrying an empty neural stack and a nano storage drive, as well as having a neural stack of their own installed in their neck. Now, this is where a little bit of knowledge of Altered Carbon is going to explain what these devices are. To try and make it as simple as possible, a neural stack works like a USB stick for your consciousness. Installing an empty neural stack into a colonist will essentially download them onto that device, updating it as they learn more skills and develop through life. So it isn't a snapshot of a person either. For all intents and purposes, it is that person. This means that the colonist you accepted, that most likely died due to their injuries or infections, isn't actually lost, as you'll be able to pull that installed neural stack from their corpse and hang on to it for later use. Most stacks that you find in the game are standard, although there are tales of rarer exclusive architect stacks in the world. These can turn up very occasionally as rewards or as trade goods. These architect stacks can do something that standard stacks can't, which is transfer psi-links and psi-cast abilities as well. So if you're intending to make use of mental magic, don't get too trigger happy in transferring the consciousness of your all-powerful mage before finding one of these first. These architect stacks will also have another nifty or maybe nasty ability of their own, stack skipping, which transfers the stack over to any target within range on a 7-ish day cooldown. Extremely powerful because it can save them from a near-death situation and provide them with a brand new body that just keeps on fighting, making what is already a potentially extremely difficult target to kill even harder to finish, as by the time you got through one of their forms they just come right back.
Bonnie, how do you keep getting back in?
You've got a couple of options for installing these filled neural stacks, either by essentially overwriting somebody else's very being or by using a vat-grown sleeve. In terms of what's transferred, they carry over their name, ideology, favourite colour, backgrounds, traits, incapabilities and skills. The consciousness does remember its original gender and xenotype, so whilst it can jump into any new body, it'll often find it easier going into something familiar, rather than something that's entirely new. That means the body, or sleeve, used to take this consciousness retains its xenotype and gender, giving you some fantastic options to move around specific traits and passions into a new body that has the genes to support it. Such as if you happen to find a brawling, jogging genie, you can say goodbye to their wimpy frame and hello to the new, tanky hussar body. Now, these neural stacks aren't invulnerable. They do have an install location that can be destroyed, rendering that colonist gone forever. The body itself can also be destroyed if they are killed by explosives or incendiary weapons, so maybe don't get too overconfident and throw them at any problem that comes your way. So yes, they can be recovered, but you're going to need something left of them to actually do it. As you'd expect, transferring a consciousness isn't exactly a straightforward procedure, inflicting what is known as sleeve shock on the colonist. This is a condition that will last for a relatively small duration of time, considering how severe what has just happened actually is, with 2 stages of impact that sees a more significant penalty if you're repeatedly swapping stacks or making more dramatic changes. There is another way of using these neural stacks, but that's getting ahead of ourselves, so for now let's move into the nano storage drive. This can be studied at any research bench, much like a signal chip. Through the study of this drive, you'll unlock access to the projects of neural digitalization and sleeve gestation. These aren't exactly low-tech projects, mind you. You're still going to need microelectronics to begin understanding sleeve gestation, and you're going to need to go all the way up to advanced fabrication before you can start comprehending neural digitalization, which is probably for the best anyway, as some of this tech is heavy in terms of its material requirement. Rushing to unlock it isn't exactly going to do you much good if you're not already rich in exotic materials and advanced components.
Ah! It's not a liquid! It's a great many pieces of solid matter that form a hard floor-like surface! Ah!
We'll start with sleeve gestation as it doesn't have any subsequent unlocks. It's much more straightforward in what it does, whilst also being quite involved. To get the ball rolling, you're going to need to build the sleeve gestator itself. It requires 250 steel, 50 plasteel, and 6 advanced components. Not only that, this thing is drinking down 450 watts of power whilst it's active, and it has a material requirement of Nutramine once constructed to do its thing. So yes, the costs around this are pretty damn high. These buildings not only support but also work best when paired with neutro pipe systems that are included with Vanilla Races Expanded Android. So you're going to be seriously leaning towards a futuristic late game colony if you're using that pairing. You're also definitely going to want a mod that adds in additional ways to acquire neutro, as these gestators are thirsty. Consider regrowth and its neutralope options. You have 3 choices when using these gestators. You can either create a brand new sleeve, clone an existing sleeve, or convert a corpse into a sleeve, saving you the time of growing an entirely new one and potentially allowing you to scavenge some artificial parts that may have been installed in the body too. Let's cover the corpse conversion first, as it's much quicker, both in terms of explanation and the in-game time needed to complete it. Any non-rotten corpse can be turned into a sleeve, providing it still has a head. A sleeve is an empty vessel that's waiting for a neural stack to be installed to be of any use. This body will be restored to perfect condition during the process. It regrows missing parts, it heals any scars, and it fixes whatever wounds had killed the previous occupant of the body. This is not only quite a cheap process to perform, but it's also one of the faster ones available at the Gestator, so it makes it very easy to grab a few different xenotypes and keep their bodies around for any transfers as they're needed. If perhaps you just unlocked a new tier of armour and wanted more efficient crafters in your colony, a few of your best could swap over into a genie body before returning to a sturdier one after. The main feature of this Gestator is the ability to grow a brand new sleeve, which is a lot more costly and time consuming, with much greater flexibility offered to you in terms of the outcome, as well as being able to select cosmetics like the sleeve's gender, age, skin tone, shape, hairstyle and colour. It also has some functional interactions too. Created xenogerms can be directly incorporated into this gestation process here. So whilst you can't use this menu to select existing xenotypes, you can make your own and have it immediately applied. Just remember this thing is looking for the item of a xenogerm, not the saved preset at a gene assembler. The bigger choices that are going to impact the time needed and the neutro cost come with sleeve quality, beauty and psychic sensitivity. The easy choices here are beauty and sensitivity, with those applying the related traits to the sleeve. They can then be utilised by whatever colonist is inserted into it via a stack. So you've got staggeringly ugly, ugly, pretty and beautiful, as well as psychically deaf, dull, sensitive and hypersensitive. Sleeve quality goes from awful to legendary and impacts lifespan, cancer rate, market value, fertility, incoming damage, toxic environment resistance, global learning, injury healing, immunity gain, melee damage, move speed, and metabolic efficiency. So a legendary sleeve can be outfitted with an extremely costly xenogerm and it still has a reduced hunger rate, as the efficiency overall is still in the positive. However, the spike in cost and time needed to make a higher quality sleeve is very noticeable, with legendary demanding almost 600 neutro and around 50 days to complete, with things like power cuts or neutro shortages potentially ruining the process if it's interrupted for too long. It's a big, costly decision to make. These templates can also be saved and loaded as needed, if you're trying to churn out dozens of perfect bodies to make a colony of super soldiers. As whilst these neutro costs may be high, they aren't immediately consumed. It uses that much neutro over the amount of days listed. So provided you've got ways of acquiring it in between starting the process and it reaching its end, you don't need to have the total amount on hand to get things started. Cloning an existing appearance is essentially the same as creating a new sleeve from scratch, only it replicates the appearance of the clone person immediately, as well as being able to copy any xenotype with endogenes without needing a separate xenogerm for it. So if you clone the appearance of a person with a pigskin xenotype, the new sleeve will be a pigskin too. But if you were to try and clone a highmate, you're going to be warned that you need a xenogerm to complete the procedure. Remember, there's a big difference between germline genes and xenogenes, and it matters in Rimworld. Of course, even though these sleeves can't do anything unless they have a consciousness implanted into them, they are still a functioning biological body that has needs. This is where sleeve caskets come in, allowing you to keep your spare bodies suspended until you need them.
It's frickin' freezing in here, Mr. Bigglesworth.
Each casket is going to cost you 100 steel, 15 plasteel, 5 uranium and 4 advanced components. Then it also needs 125 watts of power when there is a sleeve placed inside it to keep it stable. An empty sleeve only has a need for food, with an offset applied when placed inside a casket that reduces the hunger rate by 100%, essentially removing all of their needs. It also lowers any pain to 0%, increases blood filtration by 25% and drops consciousness to a maximum of 1%, making them extremely quick to recover from any ailments that may be present. These beds aren't limited to sleeves either. You can throw a normal colonist in them to receive the benefits that they offer. Just be aware that when reopening these caskets, they do come with a similar buff to the crypto sleep ones, so colonists may be a bit groggy or nauseous. Medical procedures can still be conducted on sleeves whilst they're in this casket too, making it far safer to perform operations that run a high risk of death or have low success rates, with the structure itself also providing a significant buff to the successful outcome chances of surgery as well. This opens up all kinds of options in terms of body hopping to avoid things like the plague, then returning to the sleeve once enough time has passed for it to recover whilst in stasis. Of course, the cost of not only making extra bodies to have on hand, but then building the storage for them isn't particularly accessible, so it's unlikely that by the point you have these options you're really going to need them anyway, as things like penioxycillin or even Glitterworld meds should be pretty easy for you to get your hands on. So that's sleeves and how to make them. Now we need to do the other side, as you can't be expected to scavenge for all of your own neural stacks. At some point you're going to want to make them for yourself. That's where neural digitalization comes in. It unlocks the neural connector, editor, matrix, stack cache, and the ability to craft empty neural stacks. Now, all of these buildings are pretty expensive, but one is on another level entirely. They're also heavily intertwined with each other mechanically, so you're ideally going to build one of each of these to get started, with the connector needing 100 steel, 75 plasteel and 2 advanced components. The editor takes a further 80 steel, 10 plasteel and 2 advanced components. The cache then requires 50 steel, 10 plasteel and 1 component, and the matrix is a monster, taking 250 steel, 150 plasteel, 6 advanced components, and it demands 2,500 watts of power. If you wanted to break these down into structures that you may already be somewhat familiar with, the neural connector operates in a similar manner to a gene extractor. The cache is working like a gene bank, and the editor is the workbench for this system. I do mean this in the broadest sense too, they still have some pretty unique interactions. The neural matrix is what ties all of this together, and it's also the most involved part, so we're going to cover the other parts first as they're a bit more familiar. Not only that, you're still going to need a fabrication bench around to make empty neural stacks that you unlocked with this research too. As we already know what empty stacks do and how they can be installed, all that's left is the cost. 12 plasteel, 4 steel and 4 advanced components. This mod is heavy on exotic material costs, so remember your ABCs when traders show up. Always buy components. This system of structures exists to help you register and store installed stacks, as once you've implanted one without using the neural connector, there isn't really a way to create a secure backup of it, short of yanking it back out and killing the colonist anyway. So the connector is here to interact with a neural stack whilst it's still installed inside of a body. For now you can ignore the tooltip that mentions needing steel and components. That's for another procedure that can be completed at the connector with further research. A colonist with a stack that uses this connector will have a backup of their stack stored within the neural matrix, with it being able to hold 10 as standard and any additional spilling over into stack caches. Caches are capable of holding an additional 10 stacks, with all stacks that are stored also slowly undoing any degradation that they may have experienced, similar to how conditional damage is removed on gene packs if they're stored correctly. But stacks aren't going to fall apart simply because they're left on a shelf like a gene pack would. Degradation from a stack comes from other sources, which we're going to cover in a bit. That leaves the neural editor, which at this stage only has a few options. You'll be able to attempt to reset biocoding or unbind a persona weapon at this table, with the item being destroyed if the process is unsuccessful, so it isn't entirely without risk. It won't have anything listed in its crafting bills, as everything on this table is done via the gizmo buttons, and all of these structures will not speak to one another without a neural matrix nearby. So whilst it is the most expensive building, it's also the cornerstone of this entire operation. With this neural matrix in place, you'll be able to open the management screen for it, showing any tracked, stored and registered stacks in one easy place. From what I understand, the mod gets around the cleanup process that the game would normally use to clear dead entities by holding the associated colonist data within the stack itself. So if, for whatever reason, you get into the habit of storing hundreds of stacks within this structure, just be aware that you're running the risk of cluttering the world porn data in your own game, which is likely going to lead to worse performance. Track and store the stuff that you care about, not whatever you can happen to get your hands on basically. If you do have a vast collection of neural stacks from enemy factions and don't quite know what to do with them, you do have a build to shred them available, which returns them to an empty stack for your own use, making it extremely easy to have all of your colonists implanted in no time. This menu is what you'll want to use to get access to check your stored stacks, and you have nice easy buttons for quick implantation and even dropping stacks as needed. The whole setup gives you a fantastic option if you're going for the Arcanexus ending, as you can take your 5 best colonists with you and then eject and add everyone else's stack into the caravan. Once you've got your hands on some new prisoners or made some sleeves, they can be re-implanted and you'll eventually get the entire colony back. It's a bit of a creative solution to get around the agreement that you made for that map fragment.
The code is more what you'd call guidelines than actual rules.
So they're your 4 basic buildings for storing and interacting with stacks. Let's unlock neural editing and get our hands a little bit dirty. This gives you the option to erase, duplicate or modify stored stacks. Erasing a stack will save you a few advanced components rather than having to build your own. So if you find that enemies are turning up with stacks and they're all kinds of garbage, you can yank them out and remove the consciousness stored inside, giving you a nice, clean, empty stack to work with. Try not to worry too much about how absolutely horrific it must be to exist as a digital consciousness that's being deleted in real time. Duplicating a stack works about as you would expect, allowing you to add a stored consciousness into a second stack, meaning you can have as many of the same colonists wandering around as you would like. This isn't without a drawback, however, as the existential horror of another you existing, questioning the very reality of you in that moment, is shown by a pretty heavy mood debuff that lasts quite a long time. I didn't expect to be getting Soma flashbacks whilst playing Rimworld. It's worth noting as well that these duplicated stacks kind of become their own being, even though they are a copy. So they won't be sharing experience gains or social interactions across to one another. Each consciousness is now making their own memories and developments. Fortunately, you can't make them start a relationship, which is going to be the weirdest and most advanced form of masturbation imaginable. Editing is what you're really here for. This is also what plays heavily into the stack degradation mechanic. This changes the very core of the stored consciousness, their backstories, their allegiance, ideology, skills, passions, and traits. So whilst you can fix absolutely trash stats on raiders that come in with an installed stack, it's going to add a significant amount of degradation to the stack. Not only that, this is where I'm going to cover more of the mood debuffs that come with throwing consciousnesses into vastly different bodies. You'll notice that you can change the gender of both a sleeve and a stack. If they aren't matched, it's likely to cause a debuff. It's the same for swapping a stack across to a different xenotype. Even if these things match, there's still going to be a small debuff as the colonist gets used to their new body, and if you're heavily modifying a stack, you're running the risk of the stranger to myself debuff, which is a minus 50 to mood. Not only that, if you're editing a stack so much that it's causing these issues, you're also likely going to experience a large amount of degradation, which is also going to run the risk of brain trauma, somewhat similar to the trauma savant effect. This degradation takes an extremely long time to clear, so you won't be able to simply wait a couple of days before hopping back into the editor and doing it all over again. You can also modify stacks that are already installed as long as there is a connector joined to the same matrix that the editor is, as the colonist will simply hop on the bed and have the work done directly. This saves you a lot of legwork in terms of removing, storing, and then reinserting a stack. Just bear in mind that if you're going to screw around with stacks that aren't your own, it's very much a hostile action, and it is going to upset the faction that consciousness originally belonged to. It won't be such an issue if it was just a pirate, but it's going to be more of a problem if you snagged one from the Empire and decided to forcefully make them part of your colony. We'll skip over the neural casting research really quickly as that also includes gear, so it'll flow better into the next section if we cover skill trainer production first. This research unlocks the ability to make skill trainers using the neural connector from the start scanner dropdown. This is what needs 25 steel and 2 standard components, with the pawn inserted determining what trainers can potentially be rolled. If there's a specific trainer that you're looking for, you want candidates that only have 1 skill at level 10 or higher, as this is what allows them to participate in this procedure, and the procedure itself is a little bit lethal. Using it repeatedly is likely to stack some pretty negative mood debuffs across the entire colony too, so it's not really something you're likely to do to your own colonists, unless you're in the rhythm of copying a stack and repurposing the corpse repeatedly to make it a viable sleeve for the procedure. It does work, and it makes for a pretty fast production of specific trainers. It's just more expensive than borrowing a captive raider or two. You will need to duplicate a stack if you're performing this procedure this way as well, as the stack is completely removed from the corpse upon completion, so it will obliterate all registered data of that stack and render it unretrievable. That leaves us with neural casting, which unlocks some gear, the neural receiver, and the casting relay structure. This opens up the option of performing needle casting, which itself has some insane potentials. Let's cover the mechanic of this needle casting first, to better explain why it can be absolutely bonkers. To be able to needle cast into someone, you're going to need to install a neural receiver into them. This is different to a neural stack, and a colonist cannot have both at the same time. The stack is occupying the vessel with a stored consciousness, whereas the receiver is open to influence from another consciousness, while still allowing that colonist to go about their day-to-day life. If you have a stored stack in the neural matrix that isn't assigned to a sleeve, it will now be able to remotely access a body with a free receiver, overriding that colonist's skills, traits, and relationships temporarily. When needle casting is finished, the target will collapse for a few hours, groggy and a little bit confused, but ultimately return to normal within time. This opens up some insane opportunities if you can get one or two highly tailored stacks and duplicate an army's worth of them, waiting to go at a moment's notice to shift the entire focus of your colony as required, like a max skill melee stack with brawler, nimble and tough, or a max skill shooter, rocking trigger happy. It doesn't always have to be violent either. You can simply have a stack that excels in construction or mining if you want to get a mountain base expanded in a matter of hours rather than days. Remember that certain xenotypes will still fight against some of these changes, so needle casting a melee fighter into a genie body is still going to see them getting slapped around, as their forced traits will override others. Needle casting is also one of the safest ways to make use of a stack, as it doesn't matter what happens to the body. The consciousness itself is sat quite happily in a server rack inside of a matrix structure. Of course, the underlying colonist is still going to take exception to their body being used as target practice, but this is another great way to use recruits that would otherwise have been trash. Now they can be occupied by someone that you actually give a crap about. Needle casting is somewhat limited in its range. It's what the casting relays are for, with each one providing an additional 6 tiles of range on the world map for any colonists that are currently under the effect of needle casting. This allows them to explore quest locations or engage in trade missions. Just make sure that you attune the relay to the matrix when it's constructed, as by default they're not connected to anything. Each relay is going to cost you 90 steel, 25 plasteel, 3 advanced components, and require 500 watts of power. So you might need to weigh up if you actually want to be able to needle cast outside of your home tile or not, as it isn't exactly a cheap investment. Not only that, you'll be running a new risk that if someone under the effect of needle casting moves out of its range, or if the power goes down and lowers the range temporarily, they will be downed, which is extremely dangerous on the world map. If there are only needle cast colonists in a caravan, for example, you will lose the entire thing should there be a power cut or if they wander out of range. It's the same as a lone wanderer falling unconscious on the world map. It's treated as death. So always make sure you've got someone travelling with them that can take care of the collapsed bodies whilst they bring themselves back to consciousness. And that just leaves gear, with ReSleeved adding quite a fair chunk to your spacer and ultratech options. Alongside the needle casting parts, you'll have also unlocked the envirosuit armor and helmet. This is extremely light armor in terms of its defensive properties, with it leaning a lot harder in the offsets that it provides to allow for exploration and survivability in very hostile conditions. It provides total toxic resistance, it dampens psychic effects, it grants a huge amount of both heat and cold insulation, and it leans more towards ranged combat with an accuracy bonus. It does still hamper move and work speeds though, so it's not really armor for day-to-day use. It's a very specialised bit of kit if you need to trudge through an inhospitable wasteland to reach your destination, although with one whole suit costing 5 advanced components, 65 plasteel and 25 hyperweave, on top of needing over 1000 combined work, it might just have been cheaper to grab yourself some chem fuel and build a transport pod. It's still pretty easy to build one at the destination and fling someone back too. Having spoken to Helixian about this, the suit is already in the game preemptively for future content, so whilst it may not have much of a purpose right now, there may be more beneficial uses to it later. Until then though, all of the other research projects from this point don't require the nano storage drive, so you can utilise these in all of your runs if you don't want to go the route of sleeves or stacks. First to mention is the single edition in a pre-existing tech tree with gunsmithing, and that is the auto revolver. Taking just a little more work than a standard revolver, this fires 2 shots instead of 1 with a very slightly increased aiming time and a reduced ranged cooldown. Outside of that, it's statistically identical. Is it a little bit power creepy? Yes. But I mean, it's the revolver. You aren't exactly going to break the game with the weakest firearm firing an additional feather. With advanced shields you get the cuirassier belt. As you'd expect from the tech being this advanced, you're going to need to have unlocked standard shields to start the project. It removes the downside from a standard shield belt, in that this can be used with a ranged weapon, with it adding a new complication in the mix to balance it back out. These belts have a higher max energy, but cannot passively recharge, so you need to interact with a generator or a battery of some sort to restore the shield integrity to these belts. So whilst yes, they do provide a very strong additional layer of protection to a ranged fighter, any stray EMP is utterly devastating for them, so they aren't as effective throughout a long engagement or if being used to deal with a world threat. I still value these belts crazy high in terms of the utility slot though. Survivability is king, and this thing will let you shrug off all kinds of nonsense for just 2 advanced components, 50 steel and 20 plasteel. Negation beats mitigation any day of the week, so I'd honestly prioritise these over a full suit of spacer gear. The armours are up next, needing marine armour to have been researched to progress to these variants, so they're pretty potent. You get the Chrysalis set with a Lancia helmet variation, the Dragoon set and the Fusilier set. We'll compare the first suit stat-wise to standard marine gear, given that they don't need tech prints like the Cataphract gear would. The Chrysalis armour is a sturdy, well-rounded suit that leans in favour of ranged combat thanks to the offsets on the helm. It's providing more sharp and blunt armour than standard marine gear, with just about the same amount in heat protection and insulation values. They also share the same move speed penalty and slave suppression offset, with the Chrysalis having it entirely on the suit rather than split across the helm and suit. You also get a full body effect while wearing the armour that completely nullifies any pain experienced. For the extra protection on the main part, you're paying an extra 1 advanced component, 25 more plasteel and 15 extra uranium, so it honestly isn't that much more excessive in terms of the cost. The helmet is definitely worth the extra material though, as that extra component, 20 plasteel and 5 uranium, is getting you a +5 to shooting accuracy and reducing the aiming time and range cooldown by 20%. So if you've got a colonist that already has trigger happy, this completely offsets the downside to it and further buffs the positives. Given that you've got the means to add that trait to whatever stack you like with this mod too, it makes for absolutely bonkers strong ranged combatants. Whilst the Lancia helmet doesn't have an armour of the same name, it's treated as a variant of the Chrysalis helmet, costing significantly more as it takes 6 advanced components rather than the 2 for the Chrysalis helmet. You're going to be getting worse armour stats, but this boasts a 50% reduction to ranged cooldown and aiming time, as well as that +5 shooting accuracy. It also greatly improves medium and long accuracy percentages, at the cost of lowering close and short. Basically, this is going to turn sniper rifles into miniguns that are almost impossible to miss with. I wouldn't be shocked if this saw a bit of a rebalance down the line, as you can forgo making most other gear for your colony if you just stack these ASAP. Once you've got a handful of good shooters wearing them, combat becomes a meme, and now that I've brought attention to how overpowered the helmet is, I recommend enjoying it whilst it lasts. The Dragoon armour has the same pain reduction systems that the Chrysalis suit comes with, but it's giving up some of that additional protection that it provided while still being just stronger than standard marine gear. It's another suit that's designed to assist with ranged combat more than melee, but this provides mobility rather than the mitigation of the Chrysalis suit. It also doesn't pack quite such a significant buff to the combat stats on the helm, but it's cheaper to produce and it provides the ability to navigate difficult terrain without any penalty, making it far easier to run and gun away from enemies in swampy or sandy environments. Not only that, the armour itself comes with a jump pack that allows for short ranged flight with a 1 hour cooldown. This leap ability is one of the variants that is obstructed by high walls and mountains, so you can't leap over structures to get the flank on enemies or to put a solid chunk between you when trying to get away. It's useful if you pair this suit with a different helmet. Say if you wear the Dragoon armour alongside the Lancia helm, as you've lost the difficult terrain bonus, but you've still got an option for getting across things like rivers quickly, whilst packing some serious ranged combat bonuses. The Fusilier suit is the strongest of the three in terms of its protection, and the cost makes it abundantly clear. You're still getting the same pain ignore effect, as well as even more sharp, blunt and heat armour, as well as some pretty solid insulation. The suit itself comes with a built-in smoke pop that only takes 5 hours to recharge, and it doesn't require a refuel material. It makes the suit extremely powerful when attacking world quests that are protected by turrets. For all of this extra strength, you're being hit with a much more severe move speed penalty however, and you're paying an extra 3 advanced components, 50 plasteel and 25 uranium when compared to the Chrysalis armour. So it's hard to really say if it's worth going that hard on these suits when the majority of bonuses you want are on the Lancia helm, as the Fusilier helmet does have a good aiming time reduction, accuracy bonus and some reduction to the ranged combat factor, but it's prioritising protection over offense capability, and those long range accuracy buffs aren't there. Personally, I would rush grabbing Lancia helms and the new belts. Whenever they appear on quests or traders, they will carry the colony to victory in the vast majority of cases. You do have the option of pairing this heavier suit with a new utility that can appear as a reward or on traders, the Glide Pack. This provides a jump similar to the Dragoon armour on demand, without needing refueling like a standard jump pack, instead just working on a 2 hour cooldown. And whilst I'm all for flexibility, given the slot that this is competing for, I don't see much use of it outside of grabbing one as a reward and just using it for shits and giggles. From here, the last few parts that you can create are all implants. You'll be able to craft arm blades with the Rogian armaments research, but they're going to require bionics or architect limbs to be installed in order to be applied. With each arm blade costing 20 steel and 4 advanced components, you're going to be paying quite a bit for a pair. If the colonist that has them installed isn't holding a weapon, you can see them visually, with them providing a fairly decent melee attack option and coming in more exotic varieties if you're using royalty, mono and plasma, with those performing along the same lines as their bigger sword versions. Dual arm mono blades are ridiculously devastating and butcher through almost anything the game can throw at you in a matter of seconds, especially as the wearer is required to have 2 bionic limbs at minimum to wield them. It makes their melee stats absolutely beastly as standard. The Dreamcatcher is what you unlock with REM Sleep Enhancement, costing just 15 plasteel and 3 advanced components. This is one of those modules that's super niche in what it does, so you're unlikely to go out of your way to get one, but if you happen to come across it, it's useful to throw into a body modder as there's no downside to it. It makes negative mood effects go away faster and it increases the duration of positives, meaning it's going to be a lot easier to manage the mood of any colonist that it's installed in. It's going to be pretty handy to manage your colonist's expectations, as by the time you've got to these kind of material costs, they're likely to be at the highest. The voice synthesizer is next, and again it costs 15 plasteel and 3 advanced components. It boosts the values of social impact and talking by 20%, with the downside to buffing talking being that it's hard capped at 100% impact on basically all relevant stats unless you're using a mod like Unlimited to bypass the vanilla values. That just leaves the mental fuse. It's extremely beneficial if you've got someone with a hair trigger for mental breaks with extremely dangerous traits alongside it, like Psychopath or Bloodlust. Again, 3 advanced components and 15 plasteel to create it. Once installed, it administers just a small jolt to the user when they have a mental break, and it renders them unconscious for a brief time. Now, I'm not going to say that this is the best solution, but it certainly is an effective one, with the only minor downside being that it has the potential to cause brain damage every time it's triggered. It isn't guaranteed to happen though, it just might. So before you take this somewhat extreme measure to stop any risks within your colony, make sure you've got a treatment method around that fixes brain scars ready to rock and roll, like a biosculpting pod perhaps.
You dare threaten me, Thor, with so puny a weapon?
What? He was freaking me out!
So all that's left is the ideology integrations and the mod options then. If you're running ideology, you'll have access to the new meme and presets that go with it. Ouroboros is the meme and it's a medium impact option. It focuses heavily on the concepts and interactions that the mod includes, like swapping sleeves, having a stack and being duplicated, whilst also incorporating some of the parts that would normally be limited to transhumanist, like neural superchargers or sleep accelerators. So taking this as the very first meme in your colony might make it a little bit difficult to achieve people's wants once their expectations start to rise. It's expensive late game tech that they're going to be demanding. You're also getting other presets around things like cross-sleeving and xeno-sleeving, which removes the penalties for being installed in a different gender or xenotype, making it even easier to body hop around the colony as required. To go with ideology, you're then getting the Rogian style, which pairs really well alongside Techist as it doesn't have any overlap. It provides new appearances for the auto pistol, revolver, bolt action rifle, shotgun, assault rifle, charge rifle, chrysalis helmet and some new ritual music. It's nice and straightforward. If you're rocking with royalty, you'll find that Imperial faction members make a heavy use of stacks, with deserters also stealing these technologies alongside their Psylink neuroformers. And that just leaves the mod options, which give you some great flexibility in terms of how intrusive the ReSleeved content is for each run. So if you don't want to pull the mod out entirely, but also don't want to see too much of it all the time, you've got some choices. You can enable or disable random pawns coming in with stacks, so if you'd rather they only be something that you gain from crafting, trade or quests, you want this option turned off. As sleeves aren't technically people, you can enable or disable if they taint the gear that they're wearing upon death. Bear in mind that in terms of how it's presented in universe, sleeves are virtually identical to a person. They have organs, blood, viscera. They very much would make a mess of the gear that they are wearing when they die. If you're using tweaks to make spacer armor cover all extremities like fingers and toes, you've got an option here to make the armor included with ReSleeved follow suit and also cover from tippy top to bottom. You can get a little deeper into stack spawning if you'd like as well, say if you do want them to appear on other factions but don't like the idea of having dozens of stacks from pirates laying around. You can tweak what factions are or aren't eligible to install them. Sleeve gestation time can be altered as you see fit, as well as the cost. So if you want an army of fodder to throw at your enemies, you can make them near instant and basically free. If you aren't a fan of the stack degradation system and want to be able to freely edit everyone into absolute monsters, you have an option for that here too. You might just want to up the time that it takes to edit a stack if you're going to go that route, otherwise it completely trivializes the game. Alternatively, you could keep the degradation system enabled but lessen its impact, at least in a way that you'll still run some risks for making super soldiers on demand. Finally, you can enable or disable editing Arco stacks. Don't worry about this option too much, it's a remnant from an old version. And there we have it, Altered Carbon 2 ReSleeved, for when you've simply got too much plasteel, power and advanced components in your life and no idea what to do with it. Definitely one of those mods that's going to steer your gameplay quite heavily towards interacting with it when it's enabled and left on the default settings, as essentially everything it adds is to the tippy top of that content pyramid that I mentioned before, meaning you're typically going to want to be playing around that level to get the most out of it, so it's best paired alongside other Spacer or Ultratech mods to flesh out the late game enough to keep you engaged and provide adequate challenge. If you'd like to see the current suggestion list for upcoming mod rundowns, it's available to view on my Patreon page. All the posts there are completely free to read and it's pinned at the very top. You can support me in producing content like this for just £1 a month. Gets your name in the credits of these videos and it helps me to stay alive. Thanks for watching, folks. If you have any mods you'd like to see a full breakdown for, or suggestions of mods you'd like to see covered, feel free to leave them in the comments and I might get around to them. I'll be back again soon with another Rimworld mod rundown. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon or evening. Take care.